what is your general take on cars and bids? That's a question that you have to ask, so you might as well do it.
No, I love it. Be direct, man. A lot of people are like scared to ask us about them or think we like resent them all and hate them all or whatever. I do keep a spreadsheet of everybody else that's showing up.
Welcome to the Autopian podcast. This is number 20. It's David Tracy here with Bo Bachman.
20 podcasts. It's almost like we're real or something.
Mm-hmm. I'm here, in this little shack in Michigan. Bo, it's a beautiful showroom you got behind you.
It is. I'm in our meeting room, looking over the Ford showroom with a beautiful Shelby on that side.
We're down a man.
Where's the torch?
Torch is out right now. It's was it Meatloaf who said 2 out of 3 ain't bad? You like that reference? I actually got an old school reference. Anyway, so it's only 2 of us. We're missing one, but maybe he'll show up. Who knows? But what's most important is we have a great guest today.
Now, he's traveling, by the way. So we're hoping Torch, just so everyone knows, we're hoping he does arrive because he's in New York on a layover. So we're praying that he can actually join us for the podcast as he's heading off to like Sweden or something. I don't know, something crazy. So we're hoping we get him in. So let's pray for Torch.
Yeah, Torch is, he's going to see a new Volvo debut here in Sweden. So, we'll see. Anyway, we have a great guest today. Randy Nonnenberg, co-founder of Bring a Trailer.
This is cool.
This is great because Bring a Trailer is more than, it's not just an auction site. It is this sort of larger than life cultural phenomenon that is pretty much in, like, you talk to any car person and they always have kind of an idea on what's on Bring a Trailer at any given moment. Like the last few years, most car people check to Bring a Trailer like all the time. It's like a thing. So
or daily, like me.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, let's get him in here then. Let's talk to the man himself.
Do it. Looks like Randy's coming to us from the most appropriate location one could imagine, the inside of a car. You got some helicopter pilot size headphones on there.
Hey, I'm ready. You told me to be prepared. I'm prepared. Yeah. I'm ready to go.
You're absolutely ready. Hey, pleasure to meet you. I'm David. This is Bo.
Randy, welcome to the Autopian podcast. We're so excited to have you on. Thank you for being here.
You bet. I'm super stoked for this. Let's get rolling. You guys talk about all kinds of crazy stuff. I'm ready to go on whatever you want today. Let's do it.
Well, fantastic. Right. So you're broadcasting from your car, which is perfect. Very appropriate.
I am. I'm actually not far from my garage, which is right here, but we got some major noise going on inside today. So I had to escape and find some place I could seek some solace with you guys. So this is all good.
Well, there's no better place to seek solitude than your automobile, in my humble opinion. So fantastic. So, wow. Now, I remember Bring a Trailer and in my own mind how it started because, well, not how it started. How I first saw Bring a Trailer was actually at Pebble Beach at Monterey Car Week. And I just remember seeing this like hand-painted sign. I want to say it was like basically almost like a brush paint that said, Bring a Trailer. And it was literally on this trailer with this, it looked like a barn find on the back of it. And I'm like, oh, what's Bring a Trailer? What the heck is that? And I forgot to like go home and look it up because I would have been addicted since then. It wasn't until like a couple of years later that I went, oh, that Bring a Trailer. This is the place that you look for classic cars online. How did you start it, and what was that about at Monterey Car Week?
Well, yeah, that's I love that story. That kind of points to some of our humble beginnings, and our marketing efforts in the early days. But BAT started out of sort of the brainchild of a buddy of mine and I helped him find a car for his dad. His dad had a cool 63 split window Corvette back in the day.
Oh, cool.
And he was not really in the car world. I graduated with a bunch of people that went into tech and different stuff. And he said, Randy, how do I do this? How do I find a 63 Vet for my dad? And so we went out to beers and we talked through it, much like, people kind of have their go-to car person sometimes that like helps them do stuff. And I was that, I served that function for a whole lot of people and loved that. But after we did that, we found him a car and we gave it to his dad and there was this big emotional thing and it went really well. He's like, Randy, that like, you're my buddy, so I didn't pay you a dime, but I would pay a lot of money for that. A lot of people would probably pay a lot of money for that service. This is like this is kind of like your calling. What are you doing working in the car industry? I worked at BMW at the time, and I had a cool car job, but he's like, this sort of seeking out and finding and vetting and helping people find cars is like what you're about. It's like what you ought to be doing. And I was like, yeah, that's true. But, I just had a kid and I was trying to pay a mortgage, and I was like, that's well and good, but I don't know if that's actually going to get the job done. So anyway, a couple years later, we circled back, and he actually and I ended up being the two that kind of put our heads together from a tech and a cars perspective, and built the beginnings of BAT, which was, just a blog and then distribution via email and some other things back in 2007.
Wow, that's fantastic. So what was your background in cars? How did you get started in the car business?
I've always been into cars, kind of knew I wanted to go into the car business. So I graduated in engineering and I learned German, and I went and did internships in Germany because those were my favorite car companies. Nonenberg, my family has German heritage. So I kind of picked up that language better than, say, Japanese or Italian, where there'd be some other, or Detroit, all foreign languages, right? Like where we'd all have different accents. But I love German cars, and I grew up, my dad liked Mercedes, and he messed around with some cars as a kid, worked on models as a kid, and then, bought an MGB GT in college and did what a lot of folks did back then. And then actually ended up, with some kind of interesting cars before I was born. And he and my mom were married, and they were living in SoCal, kind of in a little bit of the car scene, but pretty easygoing stuff. An early Mercedes coupe, and then he had a 356 Porsche Carmen hardtop. If you know those were like those were like the stepchildren for a long time, and they were cheap and nobody wanted them, right? And now everybody thinks they're super special. So anyway, he has there's pictures in our family albums and stuff of interesting cars. So and then I was the only son. Cool. I had two sisters and I was the only son. So he and I spent a lot of time together in the garage and such, and that stuff set me up for an automotive career, and I wouldn't say the rest is history, but it got me into German car companies and engineering and just a desire to do car stuff.
So tell me, your engineering background, did you work for BMW and multiple OEMs, or what was your role there?
I worked for Audi at first, which was very, junior in an intern capacity in college, but it was in Ingolstadt, and Great. doing it in Germany at the headquarters. And this is right when they were about to launch the TT, if you remember the dark ages way back then. Absolutely. So the coolest cars out in the lot were the new B5 S4 was like amazing, right? Like, so I had those, but this is 97. 98. So they hadn't hit it huge. I've recently been back to Ingolstadt and the HQ and stuff, and it's like this glass fortress and all this, you can see they made all this money and everything's amazing, and they've sold all these cars. But in the middle 90s, they were doing well. The A4 was doing well. The new A6 was doing well. But, other cars were pretty low volume still, and they were just kind of on the ramp up. So the TT was sort of fun to work on. I worked on the shifter for the TT, if you remember that funky shifter. Of course, with the rubber funny, recording, the boot around it that was circular. You remember all that? That was I was like a sophomore in college. I got to work on that stuff. It was like unbelievable, So
you're talking to another German engineer. That's why Dave's getting all geeked out with you there. By the way,
he's into it. Your listeners may or may not remember that stuff, but anyway, I was into that stuff. And then I returned for another summer, and I got to work at BMW. Actually, got to work at BMW M, doing engine stuff for M5s, and I just it was great. And they didn't have any Americans doing this sort of stuff, so I was this weird novelty, and I got to help out a little bit. So anyway, that was fun. And then I parlayed that into working for BMW for 10 years out of school. So it was mainly BMW, but with a little tinge of Ingolstadt in there.
Now, did you live in Germany or out here in America with BMW?
Started with them out in Germany, doing you kind of climb the ladder and do these, you got to prove yourself a little bit. So I did the internships over there, and that was all in Germany. And then I started working for the German side of the company, but in California, which was cool. Yeah. And then I transitioned to the US part of the company, BMW North America. So anyway, great company. I mean, the cars they were putting out. The E46s were out, and the M Coupe was in current production, right? I mean, those sort of cars were crazy. We look at them back, and we sell them on BAT all the time now as collectibles. But back then, I mean, that was like the current stuff rolling off the line, and it was just such a cool era. My brother was an intern at BMW, also an engineer, roughly in like 2010-ish. And he told me
like one story that I remember that he told me was that, I don't know, like in the morning, I think they would rev some M1 engine to motivate the employees when he said that like in the mornings there was an M1 and they would rev it to get everyone motivated. I was like, what? Really? Is that real? Anyway.
That's crazy. That was 10 years after me. Maybe they were needing different motivations. They motivated us in Germany with pretzels and Weisswurst in the morning and whatever. They started drinking beers at 10:30. It was crazy.
Oh, you gotta love that.
Anyway, it was a different cultural experience for sure. But
awesome.
But no, it was Good stuff.
I think I need to start the sales meeting by like revving a Shelby engine or a
a
Raptor R or something.
That would sell some Fords, man. That would sell some Fords.
Okay, so I've got a question. As a business person, nothing's easy to start, right? So what I'm really curious of, I imagine you were building the site, getting everything ready to go. What was day one like of the launch site, and how did you get cars to get on the site to sell, and who's going to trust you to sell their car? Like, a lot of times we take for granted, like, oh, this business is off and running, but getting off and running is really the hardest part. How'd you do it?
Good question. So there's been a couple of day ones for BAT, right? There's when we turned the website on. There's when we figured out it was a marketplace, and then the biggest one was when we turned auctions on, right? So those are all three sort of milestones, but they're all kind of a day one, to your point. When we started to build an audience and people started to list cars, that was the light bulb moment. But if you have to ask about a crazy, how did the business really transform and turn on from nothing? It was this auction product that we are using today in pretty much the same form. And we turned that on in July of 2014. And we didn't think anybody was going to believe us either, to your point. So we bought 9 cars and said, we're going to sell 3 cars a week. And the first 3 weeks of this, we're going to do it with our own cars, because why would anybody believe us, right? We're going to get all sorts of skepticism and like convincing you to put a nice Mustang GT on some random new online auction. Like, I wouldn't do it if it was me, if we were honest with ourselves. So we decided, okay, we're going to buy 9 kind of cool cars, nothing crazy, everything sort of, I don't know, 20 to 60 grand. And we bought them, and I had them for a little bit. I mean, they're some of my favorite cars. Some of them I'm sad we had to sell, but they were auction lots 1 through 9. And we turned on auctions. And as you might guess, and from your question, a lot of people were like, you can't do this. This is never going to work. Like, why, the 10 auctions are great. We don't need another auction. I mean, we heard everything under the sun about why it wouldn't work. And we had a few cheerleaders, but we had mostly people that were a pretty skeptical eye, and that was fine. But there was really nobody else doing things like we were doing it. And we launched it, and the first couple of weeks it worked okay. And then the third week it fell on its face, and we had to retool and do some different things, but we just kept pushing ahead. But it was super important that we primed it with our own skin in the game. I think that helped.
Do you remember the first car from the public, or somebody who was your first person that trusted you to sell their car?
Well, there were 3, and unfortunately there were 3, and we just made it super easy on them because we had to. So we gave them these super high reserves. So we had an aha moment in the third week. I think it was third week when we kicked to public cars, to your point, and none of them sold, right? They all fell on their face because ours, we started it from super low money, and we wanted to sell all of them and everything else. But if it's you and your car, you're looking out for your own interest more than BAT's interest. And so we had this mechanism. I really didn't like reserves in auctions. I've always hated cars that missed reserve. So we said, okay, you tell us your reserve, we'll start the bidding there. And if it bids up past that, then obviously you'll take it. It'll be a no reserve, but it'll start from this high number. And we tried to start it from the high number, and none of them got any bids. None of them sold. And we were like, oh no, like maybe this only works for our cars. Maybe this model is not as good as we thought it was. And I had this we're never going to do reserves. We're never going to do reserves mentality. And I had to change that. We had to break that. And we took week 4 off. And we went setting up for week 5. We had some people that wanted to use it, but naturally they wanted some reserves. And we said, okay, we're going to retool. Every auction should start at $1, but we'll give you a reserve. And that totally changed the momentum and the interest. And people started bidding from $1, as you see they do today. And it was just a super different philosophical and psychological experience for everybody. And it ended up, it needed refinement still, but it worked way better than starting at some high dollar number.
So what's the timeline look like? So you mentioned that the product, this auction product started in 14. And what is the run up to that? Like, what's the timeline look like? 07 is when it really got its very start, or?
Yeah, we turned it on in 07, and that was just me with a blog talking about cars for sale. I don't know if you guys remember those days, or when you glanced off BAT for the first time.
We used to, at Jalopnik, we'd, you'd see a reference to like, hey, here's a cool car for sale, as mentioned on Bring a Trailer. Yeah, Bring a Trailer
was just this weirdo group of people that were out, sifting through the internet. And at first it was a weirdo group of one. I mean, it was me, like, and my obsession. Every day I'd look at cars, and honestly, people ask, like, do you still do that? I mean, I'm still looking around at cars last night and this morning for no good reason, and back then I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together to buy extra cars. I had one fun car, and I had a BMW company car. But I wasn't going to go buying every car I saw online. I mean, you can't do that, right? But I would find all this stuff, and then I would close my laptop at the end of the night, and it would all effectively be a waste. Yeah. So anyway, there was quite a journey there. I mean, years of that, and that was a meaningful part of, first of all, why everybody came to the site and kind of rallied around it. But we turned that into its own, revenue model eventually, and had some partners and drove traffic to eBay and did some cool things. And that helped us sort of gain the audience and credibility, whereby that eventually got flipped on its head. Call it 2009. Users started sending us cars. So I didn't have to go search every night.
That's what I was going to ask is, did you have to go find these cars? Yeah.
So that it turned into sifting through an inbox. It was my inbox originally. And then we made it this like automated inbox that people could send to. So we built tools because it started to get out of control. Like people started to send me 300 and 400 cars every day. Right. And it just was like, and I had a day job. Right. And I'm like trying to like look through all these cars and like post the best 3 or 4. And BAT truly became like you guys know, like the treasure hunting site, like the best of the best ended up listed there. And it was cars that I thought were awesome or were a deal, but I wasn't going to buy them. Right. And it's like, wow, check out this, 67 GTV that's like way under market and it's listed on Craigslist in San Antonio. Somebody go get it, Yeah. And people loved that. There was nothing like that at the time. It sounds kind of almost hokey now, right? With social media and different
Actually, it sounds cool to me. I'd be all over that too.
Yeah, it was super fun. So everybody was logged in, and it was every day. It was this crazy engaged audience and people excited about it. And that's what kept me going. And then we started listing cars, figure out how to make some money out of it. And we quit our day jobs in 2010 and did it full time. And then built out more people listing it in classifieds. But as you guys know, with classifieds, it's either you find it and it's a super winner, or it's a loser and it sits online forever, right? And so we tried to cull just the winners, but it created, people arguing over them. And the best thing to do, the best way to sell a car, if you can, something really special and one-off, is to auction it, just because it gets the price. We didn't have to set the price anymore. We were setting prices, and that was an argument, and it's just uncomfortable. The best, if you can start it from $1 and let it bid to market value, it's really a much better experience. So that's what we did.
I remember when we started on eBay, and we started off doing the same thing. We priced it at first, nothing. And it's like, nope, it's got to start at $1. Yep. And it was amazing how that built that momentum, and people got excited about it. And I don't know how many people thought they were going to buy a car for $1, but at least it got the juices flowing, right?
Yep. Oh, you need that. People have written volumes about like auction psychology and like what makes people bid or pay attention, or what makes people bail, or how it all works. And we're not, expert psychologists, but we've seen a lot of
what
patterns
does
over the years.
Yeah, what did you learn? What does get people bidding? What's some good advice for people that want to sell their car online?
Yeah, well,
or on auction, I should say.
The auction model is, we have a bias towards auction, as you heard me say. Not everybody needs to do that. Some people, if you're patient, and some people like to start high and like work down and like have a lot of personal interaction and different sorts of things. But if you want to sell online in particular, so the dynamics of online are different, right? Like if you're selling out of your driveway, or you have a trusted dealer in your neighborhood or whatever, those are viable models for some sorts of customers. But if you want to sell a car, and most sellers want to get the highest price they can, That sort of stands to reason.
Yeah.
And the best way to do that is to start to have people overbid each other, which is interesting. And then the next logical step is you want to get as many people to look at it and as many people to bid on it as you can. And so the internet really changed that, right? Like tent auctions on some level were the best possible option pre-internet, because you weren't going to have this crazy audience dynamic that we have today online. So getting the car in the right auction with the right auctioneer at the right time at Pebble Beach or wherever was actually maximizing the potential. But nowadays, the way everybody's on their phone, for better or worse, like you want to get everybody's phone looking at your car all over the globe, right? It's just a different level of energy that you can harness into what you're trying to do. So it's if you can both get that big audience, but then have a reliable mechanism. That was our whole hang up, is like, we didn't think most of the online capabilities before we invented our own was trustworthy and reliable and actually worked. We thought there were a lot of games going on and a lot of problems. And so we tried to engineer as much of that out as we could.
So getting it launching, I'm curious, because it seemed like 2020 was kind of like a pivotal year for Bring a Trailer in my mind, when I want to call it a power shift in the industry, right? The auction houses kind of ruled the world. And then all of a sudden, here's this website, right? That's now making the big boys, big guys, whatever you want to call them, kind of shaking their boots a little bit, from what I heard. Like, when was that moment that kind of bam? I mean, things was there? I guess my question is, was there a moment like 2020, bam, it started taking it off? What happened to kind of really bring a trailer into it, like the lexicon today?
2020 was an important year for sure. 2020 was a crazy year for everybody, right? Like, where were you in March 2020? I think we're all going to be saying for the rest of our lives, because that was a crazy time. So we had auctions rolling for 6 years before that. Started in 2014. So we had not quite 6 years. So we were fighting this fight before that. A lot of people think we started it because of COVID or whatever, which obviously we were fighting it quite a bit before that. We thought this was the right way. We had some good momentum. 2019 was actually a super, super great year for us, that we had just tied a bow on, and we were starting to talk to suitors about maybe selling the company and different sorts of things. So, I always just like framing the conversation that there was interest in this, and there was a shift online starting 2014, 15, 16, 17, all the way through this. But then obviously COVID was terrible for some business models, some in-person businesses, restaurants, different sorts of things, which is really sad. But then for online models, obviously, like, the wind just came and just swept everybody forward, and really, really changed things. Yeah, we saw in a matter of weeks, first of all, everybody transitioned home. We thought it was going to be bad for us too, because everybody said, I'm not worried about selling my Chevelle, because I got to get my kid online to school, and I got to, my life's upside down, or I may have lost my company, may have problems or whatever, or I may be sick. There's crazy stuff going on. So we saw submissions to Bring a Trailer stop, pause for 2 weeks. We had never seen that before, and we're like, oh no, what? Is this over? Is this not going to work anymore? Is this going to change substantially? But the weird part is, we saw a quick pause, and then we saw a mega return and a spike, and just a feeding frenzy as public auctions and tent auctions and all these sort of tent competitors of ours, people that had sort of become competitors, they closed for the foreseeable future. So everybody rolled to BAT. And it was a totally crazy time to try to get our arms around that demand.
Speaking of competitors, well, first off, here's Jason Dorczynski.
Hey, how are you? Sorry,
Jason. Meet Randy. Jason.
Hey,
nice
Jason.
to meet you, Randy.
Good to meet you, man. I've been reading your stuff forever.
You're a peach. I appreciate that. I'm a little awkward talking in an airport lounge aloud. But I'll just push that aside.
Well, we see all the people behind you. It's kind of hard to hear you where you're at. I don't know if you could dial that in a little bit, but I'm so glad you're here, Torch. Welcome to the podcast.
I'm glad to be here, and of course, huge fan of Bring a Trailer. So I'm excited to meet you too. This is very exciting.
Right on.
So, you mentioned competitors. What is your I don't know. What is your general take on cars and bids? That's a question that you have to ask, so you might as well do it.
No, I love it. Be direct, man. A lot of people are like scared to ask us about them or think we like resent them all and hate them all or whatever. I do keep a spreadsheet of everybody else that's showing up. It's currently there's 47 of them, which
Holy
is
crap.
totally crazy, right? Like I never would have thought like that it would look like this, but say model and the commenting and the almost down to the percentage model and capped and blah blah blah, and it's crazy to see what has happened. So 2020, you were talking about the timeline. I mean, 2020, there were none. People asked us like, who are your competitors? And we said the 10 auctions, sort of, and eBay, sort of. We're kind of a different flavor.
eBay completely dropped off. I wouldn't even call them competition anymore.
Yeah, well, then even now at SEMA last week, they pitched themselves as like a parts company, right? They don't really focus on cars, and that may evolve. But I used to love looking at cars on eBay, but it's evolved over the years, and that's fine. They have different.
You don't consider like Craigslist a competitor anymore.
As for cars and bids, I mean, Miro, Jason.
I was wondering, like, you guys don't consider non-auction sites like Craigslist a competitor, right? Like, that would be a totally different category.
I wouldn't say Craigslist would be a competitor. I mean, it's an alternative of where to list. I mean, I've listed stuff on Craigslist and sold it and still do, but not typically cars, but I mean, it's an interesting and viable marketplace. But I'm talking about, I mean, I was just telling the guys before you showed up, I mean, I think bidding and auction is the best way to list a special car. So I tend to focus on auction venues and now online auction venues. And so I keep this list, but I mean, DeMuro and Cars and Bids was like the first one in the US. There were a couple international folks that like tried to crib what we were doing like in 2016, like pretty early. And there was one in the UK, and then there was one in France, and then
like Car and Classics try to do something. I see. And,
I mean, those are out there, and some of them, they kind of and I don't know. I mean, maybe they decided that on their own. There's sure a lot of similarities to what we're doing. I don't need to like fluff us up that we change their path or whatever, but we did it our way.
No, you changed their path. I mean,
okay.
You guys really helped change and evolve our industry. It's a big deal what you did. So
it's pretty different. And some of them are just blatantly like full on the yellow commenting bar, and it's just like a full cut and paste, right? And we kind of chuckle at those and think that's a little silly. Some people are more trying to shape it in their own way. So we'll see. I mean, Cars and Bids Doug has a little business out of that, and his business partners and whatever. It's different, right? The focus is people have tried to investigate what it's like to have it be in a certain sector or for a certain set of years or only in Australia or they have all these different flavors. What I like about BAT is, and this is true of it since the beginning, is it's just like everything and schizophrenic and all over the place, right? Like that. If you bring us an 90s era Chevy pickup, if it's a good one, we're like, yeah, we're in. And if it's like a 60s motorcycle and it's awesome, we're like, yeah, we're in. So I mean, the rule to get on BAT ideally is that it's good stuff. It's not like, oh, it's only what Bo likes, or it's only what David likes, or whatever, right? So,
I know that's pretty broad with this room here. We probably could, because we probably like almost everything on Bring a Trailer, to be honest.
Yeah.
Well, I think David and I, though, I don't know how much money we'd actually be pulling in, though. Really.
Yeah, that's true. We do like them cheap, but it seems like your being a car enthusiast was key in the beginning. When you're choosing, the 3 or 4 cars to write up in the beginning when you're getting hundreds. Obviously, it's like an understanding of the marketplace, but it's not always obvious which ones to write about. And obviously, there is sort of an element of like, okay, I should write about the ones that have value, but I assume you also thought, well, which ones are people going to want to read about? Like, what's going to make the biggest splash? And you have to kind of be in tune with the car enthusiast community to do that, right?
Yeah, you do. And you also, I have super broad tastes, right? Like I joke that my tastes are 1,000,000 miles wide and like 6 inches deep, right? So
you're an Autopian.
There you go. I mean, like a lot of guys or the stuff that you guys write about, it's that actually appealed to people because a lot of what we were doing in 2007, Turn It On, was reactionary. I felt like a lot of the sites online were going like rich guy, right? Like they were going like only writing about Ferraris and Lambos and fancy stuff. And I can read that a little bit, but eventually I'm like, I get as excited about a Datsun as I do about a Lamborghini, you know? So I was just like, there wasn't that much online. I mean, obviously Jason Jalopnik was crazy and all over the map and interesting, but from a transactional component, there was no market. Like you'd go to the big fancy auctions and they'd be full of expensive stuff and fancy folks, and they wouldn't talk to me because I was a young nobody, right? And then you go to like eBay and it started to just be like a mess of stuff that you didn't trust, right? And so anyway, we wanted uniform trust and uniform cool factor, and that was independent of the dollar value. So yeah, you say me being an enthusiast, it's almost more how we decided to flavor it, but and curate it. But the one other thing I'll say there is back then, and this will probably resonate with you guys. So there were a lot of car people trying to do tech, and so the tech was terrible. And there was a lot of tech people trying to do car, and they had no credibility, and everything rung hollow, and it was just stupid, right? And then I had a fairly legitimate, foothold in the car world, and I've been doing it all my life and loved it, and would spend these hours online to find the cars. So anyhow, that combo, that yin and yang, nobody else did that. Like the car magazines were trying to do tech, and it was miserable. And the tech companies, were popping up and trying to write about cars and stuff. And it was just like guys like us would be like, this is lame. I don't buy any of this. So that combo nobody had, and we lucked out because we had two of us in the helm. So it wasn't just me; it was that combination.
So when you say tech, what specifically are you referring to?
I mean, there's our tech, BAT's tech, and like the site and the fact that it worked. But no, stuff was, I mean, we started in 07. I mean, the iPhone, I think, was invented and released in 07 or something, right?
It was.
And
and
then, Instagram came on, and obviously everybody flocked to Facebook and blah, 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 all this sort of
platforms,
stuff. And platforms, but then also just the tech that like dealers were trying to get their arms around, putting their inventory online and on eBay. And people were kind of flocking online, but it was haphazard, and it was the Wild West, and it was just generally for automotive transactions. There was no Carvana, there was none of this stuff yet, right? It was just super patched together and bad, and it was just like weak, and so ours was too. I mean, we started with a little blog format that you guys would laugh your head out. I mean, our initial logo was like scratched on a bar napkin, but it was just this transition time where buying cars online wasn't working all that well, so that combo was important.
What year was that when I saw that the actual trailer in Monterey? Do you remember about what year that would have been?
Yeah, I mean, I'm in the Bay Area, Bo, and I grew up going to Monterey, and so we had this idea, like, oh, we have this website, and we're trying to build a community. Like, let's go rent a patch of grass at Monterey, which is over in like the vendor area, right? And I always loved going to Monterey.
I remember on the way to Quail, it was just on the side of the road.
Oh, really? You saw one over there as well? Okay, yeah. So we were really patching it together. I love that. You're remembering that time, because that was a while ago. I think that was probably 08, 09.
Wow.
We were like, we got a couple people watching the website, but not many. And I'm going to Monterey anyway, and I pay retail for all my tickets. So maybe if I say I'm from some sort of media company, they will give us a couple tickets if we park a trailer on the lawn and talk about BAT, and they did. And so anyway, we were pretty ragtag, man. I appreciate that you're not just laughing at what we were doing back then, but it was the beginnings.
Guerrilla marketing, that's what it took. It was smart.
Clever.
Hey, look, I still remember all these years later, because I was like, what the heck is this? I just wasn't smart enough to actually, follow up with that.
There you go.
So the Autopians, I think if they were going to ask a question, would probably be asking, okay, what are some of the more unusual, weird, or fantastic cars that you've sold? Like what has any really struck you? Or like I said, what's the weird stuff?
Yeah, well, you guys, fired over a couple questions for me just to get me some thought starters. One of them, I think, was the cheapest, the most expensive, the weirdest. We've had 86,000 auctions go through the site now, right? So we've had a chance to get some corner cases in there, right? There's the center 50,000, and then you start talking about the thousands on the margins. And you're asking about the cheapest. BAT, a lot of people are like, oh, BAT has driven up prices, it's so expensive, blah, blah, blah. there was some sort of Pontiac Sunfire or something crazy 80s Pontiac that sold this week for $3,700, right? So I mean, we're still mixing in and keeping a crazy mix. But you asked about rarity. There is a good following for us. I don't know why, but people that are really into the Esoteric type stuff, the weird one-off coach builder stuff, the Morettis and the Abarth bodied weirdo whatever stuff. We got a seller in Greece that lists his collections like almost exclusively on BAT and sells stuff with us, and with those you start to get and this isn't, it's a little rich guy stuff, but it's not like $1 million cars, right? These things end up going for 40 or 50 grand, right? But they are super unusual and one-off and coach built, and I was always shocked that BAT would have the like gravitas, the chops to be the place these people pick for these weird one-off cars. Yeah. So Bruce Meyer listed his new GT40 and sold it, and that was a car he bought from your dealer. It had Galpin stuff on it, I think, or referenced in the paperwork. And I've delivered it to Bruce, and he got over $1 million for it, so it did pretty well. Yeah, he kept it for a while, but those are. I could have got him $1.1 million, but well. I'm kidding. I'm joking. So anyway, it's all good, but yeah. So anyway, we get stuff all over the map, but my favorite stuff is sometimes more mainstream cars that have a story. So the story is actually what sets them apart. It may be the weirdo coach builder or whatever, one-off stuff like that. My favorite stuff is even more run-of-the-mill. Like I tell this story a fair amount, but one of our most favorite listings on the site was a 67 Volkswagen Beetle convertible that was listed, red, black top. It's in SoCal. It's kind of a nice, interesting example driver. But the bidding story plays out, and the guy that bought it had owned it like 40 years ago, and he wanted it back, and he got word, because the cool part about BAT's reach is like word gets to the person, you know what I mean? Awesome. Now that it's big enough. And so he went and bid and just super understated, didn't say anything in the comments, whatever. He wins, and then afterwards he's like, oh, by the way, I owned this car once. And when he went and picked it up, he didn't need them to give him the key because he still had the Volkswagen key. Oh, that's so cool. So that sort of stuff. I mean, you talk about like, right? I mean, how can you not just be stoked on that? That one, we do it like a contest at the end of the year every year for the best BAT car, and that one won it that year because everybody's just like, that's the best story I've heard all year. That's unbelievable. So those sort of one-offs. A lot of people think that's the Zenith year too. Yeah. Those sort of one-offs are just what keeps it kind of intoxicating and fun to be a part of. So that sort of brings me to... I just got to notice my flight is boarding, by the way. So I'm sorry, my flight's boarding apparently. It's all good, Torch. Hey, just say your handsome face. No, you guys are peaches. But look, it was great to meet you and hear about BAT. David, make sure you tell embarrassing stories about weird stuff on BAT. And I think if the first thing sold, did you ask him that? Like what the first car sold in BAT was? I'm kind of curious about. We talked a little bit, but I'd like to know a little bit more about specifically what kind of cars. But I have to run. Anyway, you guys have fun. Thanks, Torch. Thanks, Jason.
I'd like to ask you about like what, you mentioned the stories behind cars there. I was recently at Pebble Beach and I sat in on some auctions, and I noticed that, with cars especially, what gives them value is very infrequently the mechanical elements. And, you can have two cars that are mechanically the same, but vastly different in value, because there's so much that goes into it. I'd love to hear from your perspective. What are the, I guess, if you bullet point it, what are some of the elements that go into a car's value? And how is it different? How is it different for a car than it is for really anything else?
Yeah, it can be different for a car, I mean, it can also, that can be true of houses, right? You see like Zora Arcus Duntoff's house in Detroit is listed, right? And like, that's true. I'm not shopping for houses in Detroit, but that house, I looked through every room of that house, trying to figure out where there was like, Z06 wallpaper or whatever,
That is rarer though, right? Like buying a house for its history is a little rarer. It's
weird, but and then friends who like buy houses based on the designer. So anyway, it's not just automotive, but let's get into the automotive since we're on it. But the things that I think contribute. Yeah, certainly there's nostalgia. There's just eye candy, beauty. There is rarity. There is stories you had when you were younger and you either saw that car or wanted that car, or the neighbor had that car and you always were jealous, or whatever. There's family connections. Was grandpa an Oldsmobile man, right? And then maybe you got some you're attributing some value there. Movie stardom. I don't know. I mean, we can go down a huge list of what it is.
It's complex, isn't it? It's
it
a really
can be.
complex formula.
The old beauty, rarity, quality. But to me, the most value is story.
Yeah.
There is nothing that adds value to a car more than a story. Now, a story might be that it won a race, right? And you could say, well, that's mechanical, but it's also the driver, right? But the race car that won the race is worth considerably more than the exact same race car that just was at the race or didn't
or even
race,
second place,
or came in second place, right?
Yep.
So that's a story, right? Or that story of the owner. Now, that to me, that Beetle is always going to be worth more money because it's going to be the story of the guy that got his Beetle back, and there's going to be. Somebody's going to put that car in a museum one day, and it's going to be the Bring a Trailer, the guy that bought his car back. And otherwise, it would have just been a Beetle sitting on the side of the road or in someone's garage. But now it's museum worthy because it had a story on Bring a Trailer. So just along those lines, do any other cars come to mind that kind of had a cool or interesting story or
history? Oh man, we can go. I don't know how much time you got, but we can go.
What comes to your mind? What pops?
So a super cool one recently or a couple years ago was actually a motorhome. It's an unusual Bluebird motorhome, which was used back in the day at the tracks all around America to support McLaren racing. So it had some badges on the doors, and it had some posters inside, but it had legit pictures back in the day of whatever it had done and where it had been, and it's sort of a fixture in paddocks and that sort of thing. And then it kind of went and disappeared, and it's pretty cool looking. I mean, it's like very 70s looking and has an awning that rolls out and whatever. And so that goes on BAT. And first of all, there's racing nuts on BAT, obviously, right? And so a few people are like, I remember this thing, and and a few people are like, I worked for McLaren Racing. I mean, you get all sorts of cool dialogue going on. And then fast forward to the conclusion, and we listed on BAT for 7 days. It gets all frothed up and things happen, and then Zach Brown ends up buying it on BAT. Zach Brown, obviously, he runs McLaren Racing present day.
Yes.
And has ties to the company since way back. I forget if he said he was there that far back, but he loved the vehicle. He loved the nostalgia. He now has this. He's into vintage racing too, and races some McLarens, actually, among other things. He races a whole bunch of stuff. Sort of a friend of BAT because he spends some time on the site, but he buys this thing. And now, I don't know who wrote the check, if it was him or it was McLaren Racing Limited, but now it's taken around. They're in Europe racing, obviously, but they're also in Indy and different things in the US. And so it now is appearing again as part of their paddock display, this vintage 70s
so cool
McLaren motorhome with their same logos on it. And he interviewed Mario Andretti sitting next to it on 70s lawn chairs next to the 70s McLaren RV. And it was at Velocity Invitational here a few weeks ago at Laguna Seca. And it just shows up a lot of places. And it always is just kind of, that's another cool, again, but you talk about the story on that vehicle. That thing has seen who knows how many drivers through it or special motorsport personalities and that sort of thing. So to have
Senna,
that tie,
perhaps, right?
Do you remember what it sold for, by the way? Everyone wants to know the price.
Oh man, I'm gonna look it up. You keep going. We'll go to the next question, but then I'll dig that up. But I mean, again, this isn't crazy. We're not talking about you have to go spend $1 million to get a story or whatever, right? I mean, this thing, I think it was probably, I don't know, 50 or 60 grand. It's in pretty good shape, but you should see the green shag carpet inside and stuff is all original. I'll see if I can pull it up while we're talking here, and I'll get you the price.
Wow. Okay, yeah.
Oh, there we go.
70s era. Okay, so that was pre-Senna then, but still, that is awesome. So one thing about car values is there are some cars that you look at them and you're like, whoa, that thing is beautiful, but it's dirt cheap. I was just looking at a TR7 for sale in great shape. It was $1,000. An Opel GT, one of the most beautiful. I consider it just an absolutely stunning machine, but they're a dime a dozen. and even some cars like first gen RX-7s are, I feel like they should be worth more. And even like the Mazda Cosmo, it's like that is an absolute legend. And like, what exactly is happening here? Like, what is happening to these cars where you're just like, you look at them, you're like, that could be a 240Z, but it's not. You know, what's the deal there?
Oh man, I mean, that was a pretty esoteric list there, man. Well done. I mean, Mazda Cosmos, RX-7, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I think a lot of the special examples of those you are seeing crazy amounts for, right? Like first gen RX-7s, like I'll pull that up too. I mean, we've listed a few cars where people almost roll their eyes. They're like, what the heck is one of those selling for? I mean, this may be the best one we've ever seen in 10 years. You know, you want to wait another 10 years or you want to pay a big price. So things, when we're vetting it the way we do, prices can skew a little bit higher because prices can skew a little bit higher because the examples that we have. But then the whole flood of other RX-7s, the base models, or even the higher end models that are abused or track rats or whatever, even the okay drivers, they're not going to go bananas like the, best of the best is. So people sometimes wonder like, wow, why is there so much separation on that car with low miles and documentation and original paint and all that stuff? It's like 4x what a normal one is. That's crazy if you think about it. But you know what? I mean, there are collectors that are out there that they just kind of want the best one. They don't want to mess around and restore and have to have the laundry list of items. They're just like, I had that car back in the day, or I wanted that car back in the day, and I want the best one. So I think this is kind of the long vision, long game of a lot of collecting, is the best examples are gonna separate themselves from the pack, and the pack is still cool and will still appreciate. And it's still kind of nuts if you think about it, that people pay $15,000 for a kind of pretty okay first gen RX-7. I mean, that's a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
But whatever those were back in the day was certainly a whole bunch less than that. But there's this separation, and I'm sure you guys have seen it.
Well, it's funny. I was talking to Bruce Meyer. We were talking about it. He had this great quote, for those who are in the collector car world. He says, if you buy the best, you only cry once.
Yeah.
There's truth to that,
Yep.
If you really have the best, it's going to hurt. But, from then on, you got the best. But, ouch. It can, the best is usually going for, and to your point, I think the premium on the best has skyrocketed over the years as well.
Mm-hmm.
So going back, are there any other kind of weird cars, or Jason was talking about like the first car? What was that first car that you sold? Do you remember it?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have a poster of it on the wall at BAT headquarters in San Francisco. Was the first day was 3 cars, and it was a Calypso Coral 70 Boss 302.
Oh, beautiful!
It was, but modified.
Where was I?
Oh man, it should have been there. Should have been. It sold for $45,000. Is the scary part.
Oh.
And then there was a step nose Alpha, my 64 Alpha, which was kind of a BAT story car. We did a series of stories of a trip of me going to the Netherlands and finding the car and driving it in Europe and bringing it home, and it was my event car, and then I sold it. So a lot of these first 9 cars were kind of tied to us. So that was a pretty car. Bluette was the color. It's kind of a notable, interesting Alfa Romeo. And then the third was an E30 M3 BMW. Super nice one, 60,000 original miles or something like that, white, black, like the quintessential. We wanted, obviously we were stacking the deck, right? We wanted just like ringer cars, but you see the variety, right? American, Italian, German, 80s, 60s, 70s, just sort of variety to appeal to as many people as we could in the early rollout. And I still track those cars, those 3 cars.
Oh, cool.
I don't know if you guys go back to your old cars that you wish never got away. None of them are mine. I haven't gone and recollected them all these years later, but I know where they are. And man, I I look at them on the wall at the office all the time, and I'm like, man, those were the days. Those were the cars, you know.
Actually, that is something like that's one of my things. Is if I can find a Galpin car, that is because they are needles in haystacks. Because even though we have sold a lot of cars, they're still very rare. But if I can find a good Galpin Shelby or one of the early cars, I'm still looking for a 50s. 40 or 50s era Ford. That's something I haven't found yet. But that's my little game I like to play. Is can I find something that was sold originally at Galpin?
Man, there's got to be some of those out there, right? Like a 40 Ford or a 47 Ford. Were you guys in biz at that time?
We were in 46, and we had one of the original convertibles, like. 46, they had all the dealers, they gave them one convertible to sell. So 46 convertibles, very rare to probably $250,000 car. Man, if I could find that car, that would be the ultimate. I saw a Thunderbird on one thing, I lost it. That was from Galpin. But the other thing we had is we had one of the 100 Thunderbolts. And it is one of the, I think, 3 missing Thunderbolts. So if anyone finds that car, a big reward coming your way. And the other is the Galpin Custom, which we built in 1952, and it was shown at the Pan Pacific Auditorium at the same time the Hirohata Merc was introduced. And that was Galpin's very first custom, and that one's lost. So that's like the number 1 car I'm looking for. But so I'm throwing it out there. Just if you see a Galpin car, you might want to call me. I will bid. No special favors, but I'm all over a Galpin car if you get something like that. So
I love that, man. Those Thunderbolts lived a hard life, though, man. I don't know. Lions drag strip. I mean, that thing. Who knows where that thing is?
I got a 65 Shelby that came originally from Galpin that was sort of the unofficial pace car of the Lions drag strip back in the 60s. I love it. Oh yeah, that's our like prize. It's a garage find 65 Shelby from Galpin back in our San Fernando days. Yeah, that's our treasure.
So hey man, I real quick before you ask your question, I finally found the Zach Brown deal, and I was wrong. It's not a Bluebird. It's a Ford. Interestingly, Bo, it's a 72 Ford Condor 2 motor coach.
Wow.
And ex McLaren racing engines. It was in San Pedro, California, and it sold for $32,500. Sold for not that much money, but it kind of looks like an old Winnebago. You know, you've seen these things before.
Oh, that thing does look cool.
Deal
that looks
right
sick
there.
right there.
That's a deal. Zach
it's cool.
Very, very
it's cool.
well.
Well, per Bruce's line, whoever bought it probably crying a few times. You know what I mean? But having a good time doing it.
True. Yeah.
So cool.
I'm ashamed to say that I don't know what a Thunderbolt is.
Oh man, 64 Fairlane drag car, factory drag car, man. 427 in it. Unbelievable.
They only build 100 of them.
Yeah.
And
there's a lot of clones out there. We've listed a ton of clones. I think we've only listed 1 real one, or maybe 2 real ones on BAT, but they're floating around. You can find them.
There's one right now. There's one listed currently on BAT.
Man. I should do my reading, shouldn't I? I should read up on BAT.
I'm a daily BAT geek, I have to say. I confess. I love your site, and I bought a lot of cars.
Okay, now I'm typing Fairlane into BAT anyway. But I got.
I'm not surprised that it. Founded by an engineer. It's properly run. I'm not surprised.
Well, I'm not surprised it was started by a car guy, because that makes a lot of sense, and a smart car guy besides. So, of course.
I have a very random question. I have there are certain cars. So we have this series on the Autopian called Holy Grails, where we ask readers to email us their Holy Grail car. And most of the time, it's a very rare example of a car that is only really valuable to them. Like, no one, it's extremely rare, but it's not worth a lot. So in my case, like my Holy Grail is a manual transmission, 1st gen Jeep Grand Cherokee, ZJ, 93 or 94. They only made, very few of them, but they're not worth anything. They're exactly the same as a Jeep Cherokee mechanically. Rarer, but still not worth anything. Is there a car that comes to your mind as like one that you really appreciate? It's very rare. Just a few, not a whole lot of them are made, but like not everybody appreciates them and they're not worth a lot.
Oh man, yeah, the curveball cars. I mean, I drive weird stuff, by the way. We didn't get into that sort of stuff.
Tell me.
I mean, in what I've been driving the last 3 weeks is my Renault R5 Turbo 2, right? I mean, and I bought that car. I'm heavily nostalgia driven. So I remember being on my BMX bike and going to Ferrari of Los Gatos, which was this dealer in Los Gatos, California. And they imported and exported some sort of sketchy stuff, and they went out of business and whatever else. I don't know what else they were into, but they always had the stuff. First place I ever saw a Testarossa. First place I ever saw the back, and I remember exactly where I was sitting and standing in the back in a garage bay of a Renault 5 Turbo, and it was red. And so I was always a car I was like, oh man, I got to get my hands on that. It's actually a Bond car. It was in a James Bond movie. I think it was in Live and Let Die or something as well. And it's just bananas, right? Mid engine, it's hatchback with a huge engine with a turbocharger on it in the back, in the cabin. So anyway, that's a weirdo machine that most people don't want to go anywhere near, and they have a tendency to burst into flames. So I got to to BAT. We had like a super Cinderella story of paperwork and imported into LA in 85, and it had California sunset plates on it and like all the stuff that you never see anymore. And it was broken like they all are, and it was in a garage in Reno. And so I was like, man, this is my moment. I'm doing everything my dad told me never to do. He said, never buy a black car because you can't keep the paint looking good, and never buy a French car. So he's pretty pragmatic. He's a smarter guy than I am, a little more emotional than he is. So I was like, yeah, but you got to see this Renault. So anyway, so I'm into some weird stuff like that. And Holy Grail, is that the Holy Grail? I don't know. I mean, I also a lot of my formative years of cars were in building radio controlled cars. That's kind of what I was doing before I got my driver's license, was playing with RC cars in the sort of the heyday of that in the 80s and then the early 90s. And so I built like if you know what a Chenoweth buggy is, like I want to have actually the 1-to-1 real full scale versions of the RC cars that Tamiya made back in the day. Cool. So I had the Rothman's Porsche 959 rally car, right? Nice. And one of those sold recently for millions of dollars. So that's probably not on the Nonnenberg family roadmap. But
I don't know. BAT is doing pretty good.
BAT is doing pretty good, but yeah, I don't know. Those cars, those also had a pretty hard life, But man, I just logged so many hours with these 10th scale versions of a lot of cool cars. They made a version of the Sauber Mercedes race car, Le Mans race car, and they made just scale stuff back then, was just really cool. And so that's where a lot of my dreams came from, and some of those dreams have been fulfilled. A lot of those haven't, but it's funny you say Holy Grail. Holy Grail is a funny term. We have a list of terms you're not allowed to say on BAT listings because I told you how we designed it in reaction to the world we were in, right? And every eBay listing said, this Ford Falcon is the Holy Grail of Falcons. And we were like, eventually we were like, shut up. Like, no, it's not. This thing's got rust in the quarters and it's got a C4 automatic and it's not the Holy Grail. So anyway,
I didn't know you banned terms. This is good to know.
Well, from our side, you can say whatever you want in the comments, right? Almost. I mean, keeping it clean and stuff. But descriptions, and that was one of our things, like auction catalog descriptions, right? Like, oh, this is the best one in the world, and it's it's going to change your whole life, and we've never seen one this perfect, and it has no rust, and all this flowery language. The funny part about BAT is it's kind of just the facts. It's like a police report on a car, and it's flavored very differently. But a lot of salesmen come to BAT and they're like, can't you hype it up and say it's the Holy Grail? And we're like, sorry, dude, that's a hard and fast. We can't call it that. But I love that you have a segment, and I'm happy to use it in vernacular.
No puffery.
Oh, we can't let you do that on BAT. We got to be the traffic cops on BAT. But man,
that's good.
That makes sense.
There's so many cars that qualify.
As a buyer and a seller, I appreciate that because it's not a bunch of BS. You read what it is. Then you can get excited on your own about it, right? And in the comments, sometimes there is some other fruit can come from those comments, and I always enjoy reading that as well. But no, great job on making it real.
Well, if there's the internet with no sort of policing just kind of goes off the rails. At the end of the day, it just kind of goes off the rails. And when you're trying to transact something, then the salesmanship just gets gets so where credibility is a problem, and you got to have a credible marketplace. So
Are
anyway.
you ever a customer of your own site? Is there ever a car that hits there and you're like, oh man, I've always wanted one of those?
So I'm looking at one next to me, and I got to tell you the story of it. But I as a rule don't bid on Bring a Trailer. Another thing that drove me crazy and still does to this day is that the house at the tent auction bids against people and like doesn't tell people when they do.
What? No, that never happens.
Well,
there is never fraud at an auction company. There's no ghost bidders there.
Well, you use the F word, and I love it. I love that you're using the F word on that, because I think that always was, to me, I was like, wait, what? Like, I felt like, as a guy sitting in the audience of a lot of auctions, like I'm in Vegas, like the house is just going to take you. They're just going to take you down. And if you win somehow, they're going to find you and take you anyway.
Some houses are worse than others. Some play it pretty straight, I'll say.
Absolutely.
There's some not so much. We won't name names, but
totally.
we know who you are.
Yeah. So, well, we think, right. But I get that reaction that you had all the time, right? Which is like, wait, we all know this is going on, sort of deal. And I always just felt rotten.
Yeah, I grew up in the car business, so yeah, we're
in.
Got a couple glitches going here. I think we're going to get through it.
Yeah.
Oh, Randy,
Okay,
we
I
lost
hear
you there for a second. We just missed what you just said. But yeah, I was growing up in the car business, so yeah, we knew what auctions were like. Before the big auctions, just car auctions, because they play all those games at the dealer auctions and the wholesale auctions and all of that. So in the big auctions, they still play those games, even though they're not supposed to, and people don't necessarily make it public, right?
Yeah, well, that always drove me a little bit crazy. I felt if I was bidding, I wanted to know who I was bidding against and have that be transparent. So, anyway, I don't bid on the site. I tried once in the very early days on a no reserve car, on an $8,000 BMW E30 station wagon, because those were cool and rare. And I was like, oh, we started this auction 4 months ago. Maybe I can buy a car on it, and there's a very open dialogue, and people jumped in and were like, wait, you can't do that. The house can't do that. And I realized very quickly that the gravity of that decision, even if that was a cool BMW, the cost to the company and to potentially me and everything else of the integrity was worth way more than
reputation
than getting one car. I was like, I'll go find a car elsewhere. Like, I don't need to mess this up. So I was in the cons as I even still today, and said, okay, well, that sounds right. That's smart. I'm out, right? Like, somebody else run with this, and we're not going to do that. And that was 7 years ago. And I haven't bid on another car on that account or any other account since. Now, people, it kind of drives me crazy because there's so many good cars on BAT, and I would love to have a car on BAT. But
you could still, whoever the winner is, it would be legit to call the winner if it said, hey, if you ever want to sell this thing, let me know.
Well, and one I was going to tell you about is, some cars don't make reserve, as you know, on BAT, right? So there was a perfect 72 GMC 2500 Sierra Grande 4x4, which is like one of my favorite pickup truck designs. Like, if you give a 4-year-old a pencil and say draw a pickup truck, that's what they draw, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it's just awesome. And we listed one with a Restomod drivetrain and a nice lift and 35s and a nice two-tone scheme. I'm looking at it right now. I can describe it to you really well. It's in my driveway right now because it bid and it was 10 grand short of the reserve or whatever. And we always give the high bidder the shot. And I reached out to the seller and was like, hey, is this car still for sale? A couple of days afterwards, I saw it missed reserve, and he was a little spooked that the owner of BAT was reaching out to him. But he's like, if you are who you say you are and you want the car, it's all yours for the reserve. And I was like, I'll pay you the reserve. Let's go. So I ended up buying that car, and it's a truck, and it's an awesome buy, but it didn't get in and interfere and mess around with the dynamics of the auction. So I thought that was a above board way to do it. And obviously I'm telling you and all your listeners that, so I'm not trying to hide anything, but that's a cool truck, and I'll eventually maybe sell it on BAT and circle it back around. But yeah, we also, the Renault, we can pick them before they go to the website, but that whole dynamic on the site of us getting involved and messing with bidding is something that I want to stay a million miles away from. So we're still holding true to that.
Smart call. Oh, your taste is broad. That the truck, the Renault, like, these are all over the place. Yeah.
Oh, that's just the beginning, dude. That's the beginning. I don't have a very prestigious collection, but I have some interesting stuff. That's for sure.
All right. Well, Well, I feel like we could absolutely talk until the end of time. I know I have a gazillion other questions to ask, like especially about like your engineering background, but we're gonna put a limit to this, and we're gonna thank you very much for your time. Bo, do you have any other
Randy, if
questions?
you're ever in Los Angeles, come over and say hello sometime. We'd love to show you some weird cars, out here. And if you happen to be coming to the LA Auto Show, we got a cool display that's going to be there too. So we'd love to see you again sometime.
Fantastic. I'd love to come back to the podcast and talk with you guys and Jason. And yeah, I've never been to your museum there, but I'd love to do that and shake your hand. I didn't even know you were a big BAT guy, and you neither, David, but it's always flattering whenever I meet another BAT person. So thank you for having me. I appreciate the time.
Well,
this is awesome.
Really put together, I think, one of the best sites on the internet, period. Doesn't matter what it is. So thank you, sir, for doing such a great service and for being a true Autopian. Hopefully we can call you that now, because I believe you live the description for sure. So
No doubt.
thank you very much. This is so much fun.
All right. Me too. Thanks, guys.